welcome back to Sad Dad. My name's Dave Abkary, and I'm a comedian out of Fresno, California, and this is a podcast where I sit down with my fellow funny friends, my fellow comedians, and we talk about dads. Hi. How's your week been? Cool. If you responded to that, it's kind of like a weird Sesame Street thing going on. Oh, man, I got to be honest with you. I've had a weird week. It's been a weird week. It's been like I've had some really, really fun, awesome, interesting things happen. But it's also been it's been punctuated by these really, really sad things too, you know? Like this last week, worked with a ton of great comics. We had some great shows. Started the week off with last week with Rick Wood and Saul Trujillo doing shows, and then Kyle Clark came up, and then Aaron Weaver came up, and then Tom Goss came up, and it was fun. And then I went down to LA and did a show down there, and then the next day I met up with my daughter and her mom and my daughter's aunt. We went to Disneyland, and it was super fun. But in the midst of all of that, my guest today, his name is Kyle Clark. He's a super cool guy. I'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute. But I spent the first half of the week hanging out with Kyle because he was down, or I should say up, doing our shows, and he was crashing at my place. And then he went back Wednesday, and then Thursday I drove down to Southern California, and I actually crashed at his place because I had a show going on, and then I was going to Disneyland the next day and all that. But while I was driving down there, those fires started to break out. Like he's in Simi Valley, and I could see the smoke up on the ridge, and they were just starting, and it hadn't really turned into the thing that it is. You know, California, both Northern and Southern California, are just burning out of control right now, and all of that was happening. You know, the thing that didn't occur to me also as I was driving there is Kyle, where he lives. He lives just a few miles from where that big shooting was, that mass shooting at that country bar at the borderline, and it was I got to see that community grieve that kind of an incident. I don't think unless you've lived through it or lived in one of those communities, I mean, that's not something you get to see really, you know? I mean, this thing went from like a blurb on the news for me to it's like, oh, these are real people and they're really hurting. And, you know, everybody I talked to while I was down there wasn't any more than a degree or two of separation from one of the victims in that shooting. You know, even the girl at the gas station that I bought cigarettes from, she knew somebody at that thing. And so it was really, really kind of somber and really eye-opening to me just to watch this community go through it, and you know, I was really hurting for them, you know, because nothing like that has ever happened in my immediate community, and so I got this interesting sort of outsider perspective on what it's like to go through something like that, and really broke my heart, and you know, but while the shooting had just happened the night before, and literally the next day, these people are getting evacuated from their homes because everything's on fire around them. And it was just a real hard time for Southern California, you know. I mean, even when I was in Disneyland, and I was standing in line, and I struck up a conversation with this couple that was behind us in line, and even they knew people that were affected by that shooting, people that were victims in that. And it's just, it was just real, you know, it was just a tough thing to kind of process, and, you know, not only for them, but also, you know, for me, and I don't know. I was grateful, I guess, that I got to see it, because it did give me a perspective on an incident like that I haven't ever have, and hopefully, cross my fingers, never have to have again, because it is just a gut-wrenching thing. And, and then while that's all going on, Northern California catches on fire at about the same time. And, I think the last count was, 45 dead and hundreds missing. And it's just, my heart's just kind of broken for our state, but there's some good people out there doing a lot of really good things. And, it's that old Mr. Rogers quote, just look for the helpers. And there's a lot of helpers. There's a lot of people out there doing really good things and people I know. So just can't express my gratitude to those people. Kind of a downer note to open the show today, or whenever you're listening to this. But it's just some stuff that's been weighing heavy, and I'm going through some personal stuff right now too. So it's just been kind of a strange week. Like I said, just punctuated with moments of extreme joy and happiness and just great people. And then on the other side of it, just some of the saddest stuff I've ever witnessed and experienced firsthand. And so, it's a whole sour and sweet thing, I guess it makes the sweeter moments that much sweeter, but just, I don't know, just love the people around you. I know that's hard. I'm dealing with that right now. It's just frustrating and difficult. Just gotta love them. I don't know, guys. Let's talk about my guest because he's really cool. His name is Kyle Clark. Kyle's okay. Kyle's one of those trippy things about comedy for me where I was actually kind of a fan of Kyle's before I ever met him, and there's just sort of this weird thing that, I've talked to a lot of comedians that have gone through it, but really anything to do with the entertainment industry, when like somebody that you admire and look up to or are a fan of like becomes your friend. And that's always a strange dynamic on both ends of it because, it's weird. It's weird for them because you're like, is this person a fan or can I like confide in this person? And then, on the other side of it, you're like, oh my God, I just want them to think I'm cool. And and so I know the first few times I met Kyle, I probably gave off kind of a weird vibe because I was just trying to be cool. But thankfully he's patient and we've become really close friends. And I was really excited that he did this episode. And the more flattering thing was, he had talked to me about how he had been wanting to do an episode of my podcast. He had been thinking about it and thinking about some of the things that he would say on it before I ever asked him to do it. And I that was just one of the more flattering things I've ever been told or heard. And just knowing that somebody I really admire is admiring of the thing that I'm doing. So I sat down with Kyle. We were in my living room. In my living room on the couches. We were using Kyle's microphones. My microphones are what are called condenser microphones, so they have to be attached to a table and have to be upright. But Kyle has these nice handheld mics that we plugged them right into my recorder, and we just had a fun chat. And Kyle's the type of guy who he's always got something interesting. He's always got something funny to say, and I really just let him go on this one. And we went some fun places, and I'm excited for you guys to hear it. I'm again real grateful to Kyle for doing it, and I think you're gonna like it. So I've been rambling a lot now, guys. Stick around for the outro. I've got a few housekeeping things I want to go over with you guys. But for now, let's jump into it with Kyle Clark. Oh, sweet, man. Just hit the, we're recording. I'm actually really excited about your set tonight. I was thinking about this today. 'Cause a lot of the material you did last night, I was familiar with that material, and so tonight I have no idea what I'm getting into.
Yeah, it's It'll be interesting. You'll hear part of the thing I closed with. I was running it a little short, so I threw out to do again because it's like a long chunk. But,
yeah,
the opening and the closing on this one will be a totally different run.
Yeah,
it's, from the last 2 records to this one, like I did that cassette, and then I'm a person into working on this one. I've gotten pretty good at the module, for comedy kind of thing.
Sure, yeah. Well, and a lot of because I was thinking about it, like the last time you and I actually performed together,
I think it was when I was here in January.
It was like January, and so like a lot of those bits, like seeing them from then to now. You've really like tightened them up and punched them up, and they're great.
This has been a weird record to work on because like the last one was such a mad dash to the finish line, and especially because like a month before my last record was supposed to record, I had to throw out like 10 minutes or 15 minutes of record.
You told me about that, yeah.
Because like I had a whole chunk, and then I literally in like 3 days saw 3 different comics do almost the same thing. And it was like, oh son of a bitch, I am not the genius I once was. Turns out everybody thinks thoughts. And what's weird is the piece I ended up writing is probably one of my favorite ones on the record. And it's weird because everybody else, if you just hear the record as it is, you think like, oh, like this is just all these bits are.
Right.
And that one to me feels so different than it feels like a byproduct of writing the rest of that record.
Yeah, right.
And this whole record feels like a byproduct of writing that record and going through the process of then having to like build after learning how to do that. It's why I am kind of like, especially if you've been doing this 5-6 years, like I feel like every comic should just like burn the hour they've built.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the hour you end up building after that is so much better. And it's because you no longer have that like safety blanket of like that closer you can go back to.
Right. Yeah, because I was hanging out with Nat Bamel after he recorded his album, and he was... that to me seems so scary, where I'm at, it just seems...
I've had 25 panic attacks about this record, and I had 1,000 for the last one, and any number of ones, even before like my shitty cassette. And the cassette actually, maybe the day before it, I was running a piece at a show, and Greg Proops was on it.
Oh, yeah.
And I was talking to him because he's the nicest man in the world, besides being the smartest man in the world. And we were talking about stuff because he's done 1 million records. And I had said I was nervous. I'm like, who the fuck am I? I've only been doing this, I think at the time, like 5-6 years. And he's like, you're just doing it yourself? And like, yeah. He's like, think of it this way. By the time you're like, 40, would you rather be like a guy who's putting out his first perfect comedy record, or would you rather be a guy who's really good at making comedy records?
Yeah,
and that is a thing that I have like held with me. It's maybe the most profound piece of advice I've gotten in comedy from somebody.
Right. Yeah, just doing it and putting it out there and getting better. And
I always think of it like with bands, like because I love going and hearing like bands demos and stuff like that. When you hear like where they were when they started versus like where they go.
Right. It's very punk rock idea.
Yeah.
I like that.
And it kind of open sources it, like where it's like, see, like it's not. I hate this mysticism in comedy that like these things are all these impossible things that only this rarefied group can do.
Right. Yeah, this is a DUI culture. There's no.
Did you describe it as DUI culture?
This is I guess that's if rappers can do it with SoundCloud, why can't we?
Well, no, I meant because I believe it's DIY.
Oh,
DUI is driving the influence culture, which it also 100% is.
Yeah, that is not an untrue statement either. DUI culture. Did not get that. Yeah. Where's the SoundCloud for comedians?
Yeah. Well, I've always said that it's weird. I feel like comedy is kind of the opposite of like indie rock, where like indie rock, everyone's always looking for like the next hip thing, and then by the time they sign to a label, nobody wants anything to do with them.
Right.
And in comedy, like nobody wants to bet on an unsure thing. Like, as soon as a corporation signs off on you, I'll trust you're funny.
Right. That's funny, dude. And so what's the it's I think it's public knowledge. If it's not, we can edit this out, but you're starting a label.
I am. I've decided to ruin other people's lives besides my own with albums.
Like where did that idea come from?
I had toyed with it off and on for a few years now, and I would kind of float it and think about it, and for a long time it seemed like a bad call because it was like, all right, well, I can barely support myself with stuff, let alone try to pick up other stuff. But like, especially my last record, I had floated to a couple of different record labels. who had been vaguely interested, but it was always going to be, I was never going to be their hot priority.
Sure.
And eventually I just decided, like, I don't give a shit. Like, I don't need the prestige of it. Like, and I looked, up how to kind of do it myself and realized it's not that expensive or hard to, like, distro your album, especially digitally.
Yeah, right.
You don't get the marketing push, but, like, I probably wouldn't have gotten that off of, a label when I'm not their priority anyways.
Yeah, sure.
So I put the record out and then have kind of talked to a few people who were thinking of doing records, and it's the same thing I do with podcasts, where like I love helping people get podcasts started because it's the last free media,
right?
Everything else is kind of owned by corporations, and there's gatekeepers on, and like, I mean, I don't know that the world needs 100 more podcasts where two dudes talk about comic books, but like I've met a lot of people who are like, oh, I got a weird idea, but I don't know how to record things. I'm like, come on, man, sit down, let's do this. Let me help. Make this thing, show you that it's like easy to do. And that you also can do this. And with the label, I have a friend named Solange Castro, and she's been a funny comic forever. She kind of came up in with like Bamford and stuff like that in the LA scene back in like the early Alti days. And, she was like at the Gypsy and shit. And like, we kind of have a standing once or twice a month where we like go get dinner and just like bitch about comedy and hang out and stuff like that. Yeah. I kind of try to do a lot of those. I feel like they're good ways to keep sane, in all this.
Well, and like you could also like, I mean, I feel like you could do so much with that too. Like you could do, because you have the ability to do this so well, and you have all the gear. I mean, you could get real experimental with it too.
I want to eventually.
I mean, like with the short form comedy album, or
I've got a couple experiments I want to try. Yeah. Well, and Solange's thing was such a like. I was like, hey, you've been funny forever. Like, you should, have you ever thought about doing a record? And she was like, well, no. But I was like, why not? Like, literally. Are you just waiting for permission? Because you're already, you could just do it. We could do this. And so I kind of like bullied her into doing it. And it was really neat because like she was kind of in a place where she was like frustrated with where her stuff was and needed a thing. And I think it kind of helped her like focus and really like double down on stuff. And then, we set up a venue that was, friendly, and did it to Time Warp Records in Venice. And I brought my little recording unit because I'm just obsessed with being able to record in weird places. I've turned into this weird Alan Lomax. Do you know who that is? He like recorded all the like folk musicians in like the 30s. He just like traveled the southern country like, and would like hear like people singing in the middle of the woods and would just walk over and like record them and put them on records and shit like that. And I kind of, I feel like I've gone through a lot of scenes, whether it's like music or comedy or, different chunks of time in both of those things. Yeah. And there's so many like bands and musicians and artists and stuff who like never get documented. Yeah, yeah. And for me, it became a thing of like, oh, if nothing else, like maybe we document this stuff. Yeah. And so then working on Solange's record, I was like, well, okay, well, I'm putting out this one and I'm doing mine. I'm going to self-release mine because at this point I've just given up on any kind of acceptance from like the industry, and I'm just going to do what I do and be happy with it.
Fuck yeah.
And I mean, and it's weird with comedy, like I said, that nobody wants you unless a corporation sponsors you. Right. But it is this weird thing too of like, well, none of the bands or like the artists who inspired me to like go into making art in the first place. It's all like, Roger Corman and Minor Threat, and stuff like that anyways. Yeah. And so then I was hanging with Tom Goss, and I had said something about it. Again, I'm just a son of a bitch, and was like, have you ever thought about doing a record? Yeah. And he was like, oh, kinda. And I was like, I was like, it'd be weird, it'd be cool for you to do one because you'd actually sell because people like you.
Yeah, right.
Like it's weird. It's always fun when you talk to somebody when you're just like, I would buy your record. Yeah. And Tom's one of those guys who are like, I would buy a Tom Goss record.
I would. I have so much Tom Goss merch.
Yeah, we all
already.
Do. Like he is. There's something special about Tom where it's just like he just a cult forms around him without him doing anything besides being himself.
Yeah, yeah.
And
go on. Oh, I was just gonna say. I was thinking about this. I may have mentioned this idea on the show, but I think I would love if somebody at some point like curated like a comedian like mixtape, and what this goes back to is like, you remember like the Beer Nuts compilations, like the punk rock you remember Beer Nuts? Yeah. Like I would love for somebody to like put together an album of bits by different comedians, all like on a theme. You know, like everybody's like bit on love or a bit on.
Well, that used to be what like short attention span theater would do back in the day.
Nice.
Like all those Comedy Central shows, they would just cut them together into those weird things.
Yeah. And I man, I would love more of that in my life. That'd be great. But I derailed our conversation.
Oh, it's all
I'm so
good.
sorry.
But Tom was like,
yeah.
I was like, when you could get a label thing, and he's like, I'd almost rather work with somebody like you on something. And all of a sudden, I was like, well, now I have like two people who I like and respect who say they'd work on stuff, and literally the brain was like, my record plus them, like that's not a terrible combo,
Dude. Yeah.
So I kind of like thought about it over the weekend, and then on like Monday, I was like, I'm gonna call Solange and see if she wants to be like my as of Untitled record label's first release.
Yeah.
And she said yes, and I was like, cool, what the hell have I done?
Whoa.
And then like immediately afterwards, I had two friends. I'll shout them out: Richard Eden and Jay Gonzo, a brilliant artist and a beautiful man. Both were like, "Hey, well, we can help with graphic design because we know you suck at that, and like web stuff." And then Solange was like, "I work in marketing. I can try to figure out how to help, learn how to promote and stuff like that." And it was literally one of those like the universe and the community like just so quickly like came together.
That's
and there's
so cool, man.
still shit I've got to figure out how to do,
Yeah.
and there's so much of it that's still like up in the air. But and then I was like, well, I don't want to call it This Is Rad Records because that's its own thing. But like Rad has become kind of my bullshit moniker.
Sure.
I'm cashing on. And I've always talked about that. Like my long-term dream is to have like a company like Corman has, or like Trauma or Discord or something like that, where I can do like movies and music and different things like that.
Build it out.
Yeah, and I'd always made the joke of like wanting to buy like a shitty auto garage in the valley and turn it into a production house and call it Radland, which was kind of like my version of like Desi-Lou.
Oh, I like that.
And so I was like, oh, well, I'll call it Radland Records.
Yeah.
And then it's like the first step towards that. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, well, son of a bitch. Now it's all real.
Yeah.
So now I've just been puking blood ever since.
Yeah, that's so surreal, man. And I mean, and in any situation like that too. Well, I mean, I guess maybe it's different now that you have people like Solange and a couple others counting on you. But sometimes the hardest part is doing it for yourself. You know, I mean, you can think of so many reasons not to do this.
Oh, 100%.
Really hard, this really hard thing. That's awesome, man. And I guess, and I guess, kind of goes back to getting into comedy in the first place, which is, of course, a pretty scary thing. What was it that pushed you into doing comedy?
So I got into comedy kind of as a fluke.
Okay.
I was in college and I was in a class where the final was you did 5 minutes at the Ice House.
Whoa.
And that was the first time I ever did comedy. And I didn't even really understand that that's what we were working in the class towards. And then I got invited back afterwards to do a couple more sets there.
Oh, wow.
And like did pretty well. But I was still like a musician at that point. And I was still like, I'm a rock forever. So like this comedy thing's cute, but I'm a rock guy.
Yeah.
And forever turned out to be another 6 months. Then I had a band fall apart. And then I graduated college, and I'd actually gotten my last semester of college into a graduate creative writing program based on my stand-up.
Oh, wow.
And so I was taking grad school classes while I was an undergrad and doing all this crazy shit. And then that program fell apart right 2 weeks before I graduated. I was like literally like getting ready to find like places to stay and settle down for like this next new year of like in this program. And then it's gone. And I basically got graduated from college and went back home at the height of the recession. And I had like a lost year, and I bought a video camera a month before the Canon 5D came out. So I went like, it's the best camera I could buy. Oh, never mind. The game has just changed forever. And made a couple of short films and like worked a couple of shitty jobs.
Yeah.
And then had just kind of a lost year where I was just like, just a Gen X 90s movie.
Nice.
And then went back to grad school because there was like, I ended up the idea was, okay, I'm going to go get a teaching credential because that's like a thing you can fall back on. That's like not a terrible thing to just have in your back pocket.
Right.
But I also was like, okay, I've got to figure out something creative plan. And like filmmaking was real expensive and hard to do as a one-man thing. And I just didn't have that kind of money to attack that world.
Right.
And like music had fallen apart and all these, and there wasn't really like, I think I was trying to like submit for writing things and everything was falling apart. And finally it was like, well, fuck it. I did stand up a little bit. Let's try that a little bit again.
Yeah, right.
And so I started doing it. And I literally didn't even really know. I had never been to an open mic. I had been doing comedy for like 2 years or like a year and a half, and I had never done an open mic.
Oh, wild.
I would just like write stuff, and then people were like, "Oh, he's funny. He clearly is a comedian. Let's put him on a show."
Wow.
And so I'd like write a new set, go on and do it, and like, you know, I do fine, like I guess because I'm kind of funny or something.
Sure. Yeah.
But a lot of it was just like I'm real cringy. Like I've tried to burn and destroy as much of that as humanly possible because it's all awful. It is horrible.
Well,
and I wanted to
enough,
be Dave Attell, and I'm just this like shitty, dirty edgelord.
Oh, wow.
I'm wearing shorts and sandals on stage. I still have like my long musician hair. I'm a real piece of shit.
Wow. Yeah.
And so
you didn't necessarily grow up being like a comedy nerd or
no,
anything
I
like
liked
that.
funny things.
Yeah.
I feel like my voice is all over the place.
It's
I
all
am
right.
Getting
We're both
over like
battling a
illness.
chest. Yeah, you've got your chest thing. I've got my chest thing. We're just,
I just
fucking
keep hearing my
snotty
voice
mess.
keeps shifting.
Yeah, I'm dealing with it too.
Yeah, I liked some stand up stuff, you know, and I liked, you know, I was real into Adult Swim, and like The Simpsons is my favorite thing in the universe.
Yeah, right.
And when I wrote, I always had like a sense of comedy. But like I laughed when I was in middle school and I got into theater. You're being summoned.
I know. Silence my phone. Sorry.
When I was in theater, I always wanted to be in the real serious, intense, actory stuff, and they would always put me in comedy, and I'd always be like, "I'm no one's clown. I'm like a serious actor. I'm a brooding, wounded warrior."
Yeah.
Like, and you know, over the years, I slowly started to accept that like being funny is not a bad thing.
Right.
I think when you're young and you know you want to be some
And I mean, we're the I mean, like our the biggest bands for us when we were coming out of high school, you know, like My Chemical Romance.
yeah, it's
and
all
that was,
the sensitive emo fellas.
Yeah, that's when Green Day got all dark and like, you know, I mean, that was just sort of our motif. So it's I mean, I went through that too. And at what point were you able to kind of like rope in and like, because you have all these different creative interests, you know, I mean, with movies and you know, obviously with comedy, and music's obviously huge for you, and then just pop culture in general. At what point were you able to kind of like sort of like lasso those things together into like the really cool raft that is you now,
the
you know
rad
what I mean?
world.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like in my brain, I still haven't done it. I'm one of those guys who like, if I see a thing that looks cool, I just want to go do it. Like I think it's a really unhealthy way to live. But like if I see something, I want to like learn how it works, and then I want to like try it, because if it looks cool, it's worth trying.
Yeah, right.
And I just think that like stuff like that is like, that's fun to me, is like learning new things.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that you know, it took a long time to kind of put it all together, and for a long time it's just been like a hot mess in my head. And you know, it all kind of comes back from writing, but then even like I had so much like baggage about that that like comedy became a thing I could hide in for a long time, because I had so many like wounds over the other stuff. And then slowly but surely, you know, kind of diving back into the other things and realizing that like they're all kind of the same machine. You know, it's different mechanics, but like the core of it is still you just like trying to convey emotion through some sort of medium to another person.
Right.
You know, and whether it's you know, through, you know, music, you know, and I you know, started scoring some of the stuff that I've shot and stuff like that, and like, and that's fun because it's just that like little way of like, okay, well now I have, instead of words, like to try to make like a melody that does it. Or with like, you know, film, it's like, all right, how do I visually convey this emotion? You know, with stand up, how do I like set people up for this emotion to get them over here for this joke?
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
And so it's I think I am very anxious, and I'm a very like nervous person. I have very like low self-esteem.
Right.
And so I think that my like artistic expressions is like me yelling from inside the wall, going like, "It's bad in here, help!" Like, and so like any method I can find to tell people I'm not okay is like what it all comes from.
That's funny. And I don't know that it's fair for me to say this. I mean, like, I would like to hear your take on it, but as far as like the development of your comedy, I mean, you have that like that long form storytelling or long form bits. I know people get weird when you say like, oh, storytelling comedian or
Well, it's
whatever.
because you always just think of like the moth with the long pause.
Yeah,
and
right.
And that's when I learned that my father was a dinosaur. Like,
Yeah, totally. But like, at what point did you go from like the jokey jokes into that style comedically?
I think it kind of came naturally. I think it's a combination of like because once I started doubling down on comedy and like because when I started even doing open mics, I was going to music and poetry open mics as like the one comic, and because it was probably 3 or 4 years into comedy when I went to my first like straight up all comedy open mic.
Yeah.
And I remember like first of all thinking that was crazy. I'm like, whoa, there are other comedians here. Like I was just used to being wandering this earth as like the weird mage in the wasteland.
Yeah.
And like, so I got to like fail by myself a lot early on.
Yeah.
And I also like once I decided that like, oh, comedy's like a thing that like is cool and I can like fuck with. And because again, it had always made sense to me, but I just thought everyone was funny. I didn't know that I didn't know jokes was not a thing everybody does.
Well, yeah.
Because like in high school, all of my friends were really funny and were really fast, and that was part of how I got fast. Was like everybody was a fucking mean piece of shit, and if you didn't have a cutting comment for every single person in the group at all times, you were gonna get hurt.
Yeah, my poor listeners have heard me say this like a million times now, but like back before I was doing comedy, I never thought of it as jokes. I was like, it's just being funny. Like, but if I go back and look at like old jokey Facebook statuses I've put up, I'm like, oh, there's very clearly the skeleton of a joke there. There's a setup and there's a punch and there's a tag. Like, but like if you're not interested in comedy, none of those things, those are very intuitive things. You know what I mean? But then when you contextualize it with comedy, like, it suddenly becomes a mechanical process. But first and foremost, it was always about, just be funny. Like, just be funny.
And I think for me too, like, especially as I started looking at comedians that I liked and stuff like that, and there were things I was kind of like drawn to, like I liked, like a Mike Birbiglia's early stuff and things like that, or early Marin and things like that, where there are these kind of like, it's not quite set up punchliney stuff. Like I always I always liked like Mitch Hedberg and stuff like that, but I never wanted to like be Mitch Hedberg because he was like too cool. I couldn't like do that.
Yeah, right.
But like I looked at like the I think some of the big ones were like, there were like early on like jokey people I like David Tell is one of my favorite comedians of all time, and Chris Rock is one of my favorite comics of all time, and like Chappelle, I mean, I'm a human, so of course I'm a fan. Yeah, and then like Greg Giraldo was a big one for me.
Yeah,
and
Greg Giraldo was great. Yeah,
and another one that was a real game changer for me is there's like a couple of records I looked at that were like real seminal in how I looked at things, and then like there was like a shift a little later too, but like it was like Midlife Vices from Greg Giraldo. And fucking like all of Chris Rock's specials were probably like two of the big, and then Skanks for the Memories. And one of the things I found is like, I liked, that Attell could just throw jokes at things. But beyond that, what I liked about like both Chris Rock and Greg Giraldo is like they'll pick a topic and then just like write the shit out of it. And eventually when I found like Paul F, he does the same thing. And people like that. Or Gaffigan. Like and so
Gaffigan.
Like they're really good at doing that. And then it became this thing of me exploring like, okay, well what if I like take it one step further and like I like to like do narratives and like kind of add that element to it.
Yeah.
And so it became this weird experiment of like, okay, how much can I make this like a story, but also like it's actually a bunch of bits that I've like turned into look like a story. So it all starts from jokes, but the jokes all come from like a premise that's just like, what's a weird thing I can explore? Like on the thing, like the the whole chunk I have that seems to be everybody's favorite thing is the missing fingers thing.
Yeah.
That literally was like I was at a funeral for a relative, and I realized I was thinking about the whole fact that like so many members of my family are missing fingers. I was like, I should just ride around with that. And literally was sitting in a car somewhere waiting for a meeting and just had my notebook and I just started writing it. Like I all of a sudden had 6 pages of just like, what can I free associate with? How many things? And like a ton of the lines that are in there, came out of that. Like that opening line of like, I have an uncle who can roll a joint with 6 or 7 fingers and then ... because that is how many he has. It was like the original version of it. Like, and I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. And then it went, and then you get it on stage and you start for me, miking and testing stuff, it's funny that it was a thing I didn't know when I started, because now it's like such an important thing for me.
Yeah.
Because part of what I like too is like, I will see what parts not only get laughs, but like emotional engagement.
Yeah.
And like, the fingers thing, it really became this thing of like, I don't blink at it. And then at one point when I realized how much it seems to like shock, Jesus Christ, my body's falling apart.
You're fine.
It seems to get this big reaction out of people. And so like, oh, let me double down on that. And so now I can add punchlines, but I can also add like tension of these like almost like gory moments within it.
And you learn what you need to like let hang, like letting those types of things hang. You're very good at like the silence too, like that
was a real project on the last record. Was like I used to just like power through stuff. I've always I used to be terrified of the light, and I was afraid of running long. I was convinced if I ran long, no one would ever book me again. So I'd always like run. So I started to do a thing on the last record where I would just get up on stage and like, how long can I stand on stage and not talk before I start?
Yeah.
And part of that came from, I kind of started to get discouraged with comedy stuff, and because everything was kind of the height of like alty stuff.
Yeah.
And I really didn't love that every comedy act for a while was just like, hey, did you notice this thing from our childhood was a little weirder when you look back at it? Like, I hate it. I hate it so much. And like, people do it well, but it's just like, it became, it's like when every band starts to sound like Green Day, you're like, maybe we have to kill Green Day.
Yeah.
Like,
chop off the head.
Yeah, it's the only way to kill the monster.
That's
and
funny.
I got kind of burnt, and then I found Stuart Lee, who's an English comic, who part of his act is just an active disdain for comedy.
That's I'm into it. Yeah.
And his other thing is just like defiantly challenging the audience to get smarter. And that was such a like head exploding moment. Like, oh fuck, because I'd have moments where I'd like dumb a joke down for an audience.
Yeah.
And I'd feel like a whore afterwards, because I'd do like a cheaper version of a joke. And I'd be like, well, yeah, it got a laugh, but like I don't feel like I did anything with it. I was talking to a friend recently about how like I wish I was a comedian who could just be like happy just getting a laugh and doing his job, but like I have to like, no, it's also got to like say this and do this. And I feel like I have to like earn it on all these extra points, which I don't like, but I'm an asshole. And like, for me, it's not fun if I don't make it dumb and hard.
Yeah, right.
And so,
I mean, but you do so well. I mean, you.
That's why I like this place, and why I always like went to like rough rooms, and I think it's why Keith and I got along really well for a long. Keith Carey, for anybody listening. Is like both of us like really tough rooms, and to do stuff that might not necessarily play in those rooms.
Sure.
Because if it plays in that room, it's going to play fucking anyway.
Yeah.
And
so the weight room. For
you
sure.
know, I always make it's why my stuff's not referencey.
Yeah, and it would be, and it seems like for a guy like you with such an encyclopedic knowledge of pop culture, it seems like that could be a trap you could fall
and when you
into,
hear
but
people do like impressions of me or impressions of my stand-up, it's always funny because it's always references.
Yeah.
And then if you look at my act, like I don't not make references, but I've never built a joke or a premise or a something off of a reference.
Well, and the only thing I maybe saw that was close to that last night was the true crime thing, but the second you said, hey, is there any fans of true crime? The room fucking exploded because everybody's a true crime fan right now.
Well, and the trick with that bit, because you're right, if you'll notice, what I do over the course of that bit is talk about John Wayne Gacy. I don't reference him and assume you know. The rest of the bit is me literally giving you a biography of John Wayne Gacy. So that by the end of it, if you don't know, you're already having fun because I've given you, and this came from teaching, was like I've given you a piece of information that you're learning and then put a punchline at the end of it. So I've tricked you into laughing, which means that you had to process that information in a critical way.
Right.
And so it's a thing where it's like, I've got a reference in there, but then if you don't know the reference, I'm also teaching you the thing. So by the end of that bit, you know way too much about John Wayne Gacy.
Well, and not only that too, but you also subvert the, the trope. I mean, that's part of the bit is the trope. And it's almost like you're almost like you're embracing that pop culture nerd only to exploit him. You know what I mean? And I think that's a great
I love
twist.
the idea of only using powers for bad. Like don't ever use it anything for good. None of these things are of value. So it's fun to just like hang a hat on that.
Yeah.
And that's why like it's fun at the end of the bit that like I'm still the asshole.
Yeah, right. Totally, absolutely. John Wayne Gacy wasn't planning on this fucking alpha nerd being here today. Oh, that's funny. And so, I mean, you started, and how long ago was it that you?
I started in 2008.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I hit a year I hit a decade this year.
That's wild.
Yeah,
dude.
and I would say 2010 is when I really start going harder.
Yeah. And you also have one of the. It's weird to say this, but you have one of the older podcasts out there too. You know what I mean? Like
I do feel like it was the podcast that launched a lot of podcasts.
Yeah. Yeah, we're all sort of like in the wake of
which
This
I
Is
always
Rad.
feel like is unfair because like Rivers was ahead of me by like a year.
Was he?
Like the goods was out there for a hot minute before we got going, and so like I always feel like he really set the tone, and then like we just kind of jumped in.
Yeah.
And man, it was such a like good time and real lucky, you know. And then it's one of those things that like, man, it took me again, not unlike everything I do, like probably a year or two of hemming and hawing trying to figure out what I wanted to do for a podcast because I love podcasts. They are, like I said, they're the last indie media, and on top of that, they're like a thing that there's a million different kinds of things, and so like you can find whatever you're looking for. There's a podcast for it, and I kind of love that aspect of it.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to do something in that field because it's the thing I liked, but I also didn't want to do something shitty.
Yeah.
And I'd seen a lot of shitty podcasts.
Right.
And I definitely got discouraged. I definitely have like a very specific memory of like talking to a person in the comedy community and going like, oh, I'm thinking of starting a show, and them being like don't do it, man. It's a dead format. It's it's all full up, and going like, oh, maybe he's right. And, that put me off a little bit, and then eventually
that
like
was 9 years ago.
and like it's funny because like I do feel like people constantly want to like write off things that are as dead instead of just going like, well, I guess it's just gonna keep going.
It's just because you don't know how to use a digital recorder doesn't make the medium dead.
Serial came out and there was a hit. I mean, it's sort of like it would be like if they were like, well, Jaws came out. I guess movies are over now. We had one big one.
Totally. And so in that, I mean, obviously,
what I knew I wanted to do eventually was do something that was like positive, because I felt like especially at the time there was so many things that were comedians talk about somebody's hard work like it's shitty. And I'm like, as somebody who's like worked on a lot of stuff, I just like was like, I don't want to like sit around and just like shit on other people's things. And I realized like so many people I'm friends with, we found out we had something in common, and then, you and I are one of a million versions of that, where we found out we like a thing, and then we just like bullshitted about it for 2 hours in front of a place.
Right.
And I was like, oh, well, I could just, I feel like you get to know people through that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it, became like a fun way to do a get to know your friend, where it's not tell me about your comedy.
Yeah, right.
But it's like, okay, well, if you're a comedian, it'll probably come up. But also like, what is a thing you like?
Yeah.
And then it became and that was really fun. And then you learn stuff as you go along with it. I imagine you've had the same thing where like shit that happens in your podcast, that you'd never expect episode 1, that by episode 10 is like standard stuff.
Yeah, right.
Like my favorite thing is like when I ask people what they want to talk about, it's always a shock. I feel like, especially when I give people like open reign, like there's so many times where people just like pull something out and I'm like, I didn't even know you liked that. Like I remember with Laura Crawford, she was like, can I do John Krakauer? I was like, I didn't know you read books, Laura. Like this is amazing. And that was a great early episode. It was just like, because I had no idea. So I get to see a person I've known for years talking about a thing I had no idea they were into.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah.
And that's such a fun aspect of it. And then the other thing is just like, God, everything about learning to do a podcast is great.
Yeah.
Consistency, learning to get comfortable on mic, learning to like talk to people and figure out ways to approach stuff.
Yeah,
and things
just
like
keep
that.
the conversation moving. And yeah, absolutely.
And it's funny because you never know what you're going to end up talking about. I laughed. If you had told me that we'd have in the first 100 episodes covered Animorphs and the Fast and the Furious, I'd be like, what? But wouldn't have done a Kurt Vonnegut or some other thing I like. I'd be like,
funny.
oh, and those are, sometimes the ones that are the weirdest topic end up being like, I still think Animorphs is one of the top 10 ones I recommend people check out.
I do not think you guys got enough credit for being ahead of the Tom DeLonge thing.
Yes.
Like you were. I may have
We did
mentioned
a 2.5-hour episode on when that first book came out.
and it was great. Yeah, I mean, and
Brent Schmidt is like our the special episodes where if like he's on because he's not he's a regular but he's not regular like some of our other guests, but when Brent shows up it's going to be one of the best episodes we've ever done.
And then all of a sudden Tom was on Rogan and then it exploded, but you guys were way ahead of that, ringing the bell.
Fucking Brent and I, that was all we were talking about for a while.
Yeah.
Was just this watching the saga of Tom DeLonge conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
Like it just became such a weird thing. Yeah, it's fun sometimes when you hit a thing before it shows, and hits big and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you guys were ringing that bell well ahead of everybody, I felt like. And I remember hearing, but I remember hearing about Tom being obsessed with aliens, but it was just one of those passing things, and it really wasn't until your podcast where I was like, holy shit, this guy really is nanners. Like, whoa. So, yeah. Well, Kyle, you're Kyle Clark.
I am.
This is a podcast called Sad Dad.
It is.
And we talk
I'm
about...
so excited to be on Sad Dad.
Are you? That's great. I'm so excited to have you on. We talk about dads.
We do.
We've gotten to know you. The way I like to start when we get into the dad portion is I like to just have you run me through it, like starting at the beginning. Like, so where'd your dad grow up?
My dad born in the Valley.
Oh, was he really?
Yeah, born in Northridge.
Nice.
Both my parents are Valley locals.
Really?
OG, yeah.
Yeah.
I am, on my dad's side, I think like third generation Californian.
Really?
And on my mom's side, something like that. But it's like deep Californian.
Yeah.
He was born in the Valley, grew up out there. He is the oldest of three. He is a tall gentleman.
Mm-hmm. I've stayed at your house a few times now, and I always feel like when I'm there, I'm like Jack, and I'm at the top of the beanstalk, like because
But you're like a big guy too.
I know,
so
but I'm not tall. You guys are so much taller.
You're
than
what,
me.
6'1"?
Me?
Yeah,
dude. No, I'm 5'8".
Oh, really?
Like even
I
like
think of you as like a big guy.
No, well, I guess that's a good thing. No, like I stepped into your shower.
Yeah.
This is for tall people.
Well, imagine the opposite of that, and you understand the hellscape I live in all the time. But yeah, so I come from tall stock. My dad is 6'4", and my mom is 6 feet.
Oh wow, yeah. I met them both. I didn't realize your mom was 6 feet though.
Yeah,
wow.
She might have shrunk a little bit over the years, but
sure.
but she's deceptively tall. She looks short because she's surrounded by 3 giant dudes and a huge dog. It truly is a comedic, Muppet-esque, we are the House of Joints, But my dad was an athlete. His dad was a scientist. He was like a genius and also kind of an asshole. And my dad and his dad did not get along super well. But the one thing they kind of got along with, sort of, was that my dad was like a world-class athlete.
Really?
And so then he, from being a kid onward, was all the sports all the time. Mm-hmm. And then by the time he got to high school, he was the top football player at the school. He also ran track, played basketball, did all this stuff.
Really?
And then went full ride to Denver for football there, and went to college there, and mostly just partied. I remember specifically there's only those years, and I'll get to it in a minute because there's other sides to this story, but
sure.
I only hear pieces of that stuff, partially because he was fucked up a lot of the time. But he was one of he was the only guy who had an interracial roommate when he was in college, because nobody else would do that, and he liked this dude because he was the only other guy on the team who had a tattoo, so they lived together.
I love that.
And so that was their whole thing, and he played football, and then he briefly was playing for like the Denver Broncos.
Really?
Yeah, and then got hit on a motorcycle by a drunk driver and broke, most of the bones in his body and went into a coma for like a month or so. And they said he'd never walk again.
Whoa!
And then only because he had a world-class athlete's body did he be able to like recover and walk and stuff like that. And so then he was like crippled, but still like real strong.
Yeah. Wow.
And during all that run, and I'm kind of blown on my dad's spot, but I think I've told a lot of the story and he's pretty open about it. But like, he from a very young age, because he was like a star athlete and also from a real turbulent family background and stuff like that, did the drugs.
Sure.
What drugs? Yes. To quote Keith Carey.
Yeah.
And was a real party machine. So would just win the game and then party like it's 1979.
Yeah. Which it might have been.
It could have for one of the years at some point it was.
Yeah.
And then here's a fun weird fact. My parents went to the same high school, graduated in the same class, and didn't know each other. And it's made this much weirder because my mom is younger than my dad. And so the only reason they graduated in the same class is because my mom skipped a grade.
Because she's so smart.
Yeah. Like, it's so fucking weird.
Oh, that is funny. And I mean, what kind of a guy? I mean, it sounds like he was just like a really nice, chill dude. Like, I mean,
well, at the time he was known as like the Wolfman. He was a nightmare violence machine.
Oh, was he? Really?
Oh yeah, no, he was a maniac. He was
like
because then after he got out of sports and couldn't do that, he was like kind of a hired thug and maybe
really?
like worked for some organizations and beat some people and did some crazy things. Like he has some stories that involve a lot of craziness. Was rough and tumble guy for a few years there.
Wow. He's such a sweetheart.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, that's. Oh, also he's blind in one eye. So let me go ahead. He's got Coke bottle glasses through all this too, just as a murder machine. So like almost blind, but also will kill you.
Yeah.
And going through all these things, and then eventually he is bouncing at a bar called Weber's, where he's tossing people out and doing all this stuff, and he meets my mom, and there they hit it off. My mom literally only went on a date with him because he was taller than her, and she, was like, sure, why not, and so. And then found out while they were talking that he like had a brain. She just thought he was like a dumb guy, and she like made fun. He had an Alfa Romeo, and she was making fun of it as a penis car.
That's funny.
Because my dad, when he got out of the sports stuff, he got into car racing, like amateur car racing.
Oh, interesting. Wow, he really was just living a fast and hard lifestyle.
I was doing the auto racing stuff, and like his whole family does that. So like my grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, and dad all used to race cars.
It doesn't even seem like he could fit in Alfa
Romeo.
Yeah,
it's insane. And the best, like the last car he drove was the Sports 2000 sports prototype car that like his head literally just like stuck out. It was the funniest goddamn thing.
Dino the dinosaur.
And so it was like like in like Donkey Kong and Mario Kart where like barely fits on the cart. But. And they hit it off and they start dating and stuff like that. And it turns out they both know, like, this is the crazy thing. They knew siblings of each other's friends. There were so many parties over the years they were at the same time. Because my mom comes from a big family with 4 kids, and like they were very social creatures, as was my dad and stuff like that. So it's just like, it's so weird when I look at like family stuff because it's so weird and intersected in all these ways where it's just like, madness. It's like a goddamn Robert Altman movie. And so they are together for a few months, but then my dad is like, hey, I really like you, but I have got to go. I signed on. I'm going to go be a gold miner in the Yukon Territory in Canada.
Okay.
And so he went up and was a gold miner in Canada.
Wow.
And then so he's up there, and then eventually like my mom's calling him and writing letters and stuff like that, and eventually like my dad's sister and mom are both like, hey, we feel like we should get to know you. You're this lady my dad that he seems real sweet on. Who the fuck are you? And then she went up to visit him, and when he got up there, he pulled out a nugget of gold and proposed to her with a gold nugget.
Wow.
In a gold mining town.
Holy shit. That's really pretty. Like, does he mellow out at that point?
We'll get there. Okay. It's a journey.
Oh.
And so They get married, and that's probably 5 years before I'm born. I'm the oldest of two.
Okay.
And in those years is where it goes, cool. Now I'm married to this fella. He seems like an all right guy. Also, bit of a drug problem, bit of a, all these things. And, it kind of came down to like, okay, my dad had kind of lived as this type of guy for such a long time and kind of hit some rock bottoms and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And my mom was like, look, I'm not having kids with you until you get your shit together.
Uh-huh.
So he goes back to school to Northridge. My mom works and pays, the bills while he goes and gets his real estate license, and he becomes a real estate guy. He starts working for a family that he knew when he was young, that are working in real estate. Gets clean. He has not had a drop of booze or any kinds of drugs in, let's see, I'm 31, so 32 years.
Wow.
He had a year sober, and then I come along.
Wow.
And so, it's not been a party, he's definitely it's been interesting to know my dad, because I love my dad. He's one of my heroes. Mm-hmm. He is a guy I really admire. He works really hard. He's a very smart, very humble dude, and just really, makes shit happen. He is, both my parents are such a huge influence on me, and they have always been really encouraging and really supportive and stuff like that. And part of it is just when you have a dad who's driven cars and done all these things, you're you do have this weird sense of why can't I do whatever weird dumb thing I was thinking of doing?
Right.
And then I think for a long time he was kind of looking for an outlet for stuff. And one of the coolest things that happened is when I was probably 11 or 12, he had a bass in his closet forever that he'd had from back in the day. And he pulled out and he started playing, taught himself to play bass. And now that was 15, almost 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And holy shit. Now he's been in a million bands. He's a crazy, incredible musician.
Yeah,
we have
I got to watch him play last
time. We have
a
recording studio in our house. He's had a band that's been playing that's a cool jam band kind of thing that's been around for probably 15 years now. Yeah. And he'll always be I'm terrible. He's a crazy good bass player. It's
he really is.
He's really good. And that was such a cool thing to watch him kind of find a thing that gave him.
And that was later in life.
Yeah,
that he
was probably in his 40s.
Whoa.
Yeah, he kind of got into it and started rolling with that. And it's been interesting over the years because when he first started playing, it's him and kind of other hobby dads playing along. And now the guys he's playing with are all pretty serious musician guys. He trucks in pretty serious circles with stuff. And,
wow.
It's always my dream to be able to do something where I can have his band open for me doing something.
Yeah. So, I mean, was there a point where your dad was learning how to play bass and you were also learning
100%.
how to play?
He has a year head start on me and my brother.
That's funny.
Or maybe 2 year head start. Then all of a sudden at some point I was I want to learn how to play.
It's kind of cool that you guys are all at kind of the same
we would all go to lessons together on Saturdays.
I love that.
And so we all had different teachers and stuff like that.
That's amazing.
It was neat. And then we all kind of swapped around teachers and stuff like that. I had my dad's guitar teacher who eventually his guitar teacher eventually went on to be the singer guitar player in his band.
Oh, cool.
Because they got along really well. And it's this guy, Tom, who is one of the best people in the world. And he had written songs and, kind of didn't. Him and my dad are the same kind of dorky guys.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of perfect because, all of a sudden they were both well, I've been looking to do this. Oh, me too. And then they both locked in. And then they both, have this crazy musical chemistry. And, that, when. Eventually Tom had to move, and I'm always very sad about it. I miss, him being around and stuff like that. Cause when it was kind of the prime lineup of my dad's band, it was a weird period of time there where I genuinely enjoyed my dad's band's original songs and stuff like that. I would bring people to their shows. I'm guys, my dad's band's actually pretty good.
I love that.
It was funny. Cause by the time I was meeting, comics who were into jam band stuff, it would be funny because occasionally I'd play them something or they'd see something with my dad. There are certain comics who have this weird mysticism about my dad, especially from the 4th of July parties and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, my experience with your dad, the first time I met him was, I'd gone to your 4th of July party and I knew a lot of people there, but not everybody there.
It's a lot of people.
And so there was sort of like a lull in my socializing where I was kind of where do I go? Who do I talk to? And then your dad's just sitting there.
And my dad will talk to anyone.
Yeah, your dad's hey, come on over. Like he could like, clearly tell I was
Yeah.
like in a real like rut socially in that moment. And so yeah, I just sat and talked with your dad.
There's like, so for anybody listening who doesn't, I throw a big like comedy 4th of July party. And what's fun about it is there's no show, there's no stand-up.
Yeah.
You just have to come and be a person.
Yeah.
But like most of the people I know are comedians, and then a lot of like my brother's musician friends and some other people from life come out. But it's always fun because it's comedians having to be people and interact without there being any sense of like a thing happening.
Yeah, I got Tom Goss and I got chastised by Keith Carey because Tom and I started talking about some material that we were working on, and Keith's like, "Nope," and we're like, "Okay,
This is a safe place.
Yeah.
Nope. There's bits, but no talking about craft.
Right. Yeah.
And it's fun, and it's become, I've been doing it for 5 years now. And it's one of my favorite things in the world because it's just so fun. Because part of what's fun is, I truck in a couple of different comedy circles. And so sometimes I forget that like people don't all know each other.
Yeah.
So occasionally, like one of my favorite was like the first year I do it, two of my favorite comedians in the world are Rich Slayton and Elisa Curry.
Yeah.
And like they had never met before. And they sat at a table and talked for like 2.5 hours.
that's
I just kept
amazing.
walking by and just like loving watching these two people who I think are both brilliant. Like just like, going, hey, you're not so bad, that one. And so, but the other thing that I always laugh is that seeing which comics are drawn to my dad, because there's always like certain comics who will end up just like standing around talking to my dad.
Yeah.
And then there's a totally different subset of comics who will go and hang out with my mom.
Yeah, your mom's great.
And my
too.
mom just like holds court at that
She
thing.
does,
like
dude.
it's so funny.
She's so easy to talk to too. Like when I was down there in August, like I think your mom and I talked for like an hour and a half straight. Like we're just sitting on the fucking couch.
We're chatty people.
Yeah. It was. They're great. They're amazing.
It's and it's fun because like they both feel like, because I realized at a certain point a few years in, it was funny, me and my folks were talking about it, and like part of it is like I think a lot of comics come to LA and then don't see their family for a long time.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they see a like mom and they can just like start talking to them, and you can sort of see that they're just like, oh, I can like tell this mom my things.
Yeah,
And like
there's
the
this
mom
weird,
is like
mom
listening. Yeah.
void that is being filled.
And the same thing with the dad, where like some people just like need a little dad energy in their life, and it's just such a funny thing. And like, and they both are aware of it, but it's also they dig it, and I think a lot of people, if their, kid is involved in some weird thing, at the best you can always hope for like, oh, like they do this. Like I've always been real big on like throwing my folks into stuff because like they're both cool people,
Well,
and
they have like a genuine understanding of the lifestyle too.
well, we have like, I mean, you've been part of this before, we have touring musicians and comedians stay on our couches all the time. Like my parents have always, especially because of like NA and program stuff for my dad, like we've always been a very like open house for like taking people in. And like if you don't like every year, like Thanksgiving and Christmas, we've always got extra comedians or like people who like, if you can't afford to go home, you don't get along with your family, you got something like the Clark Christmas always has, and Thanksgivings always have like stragglers hanging out, and stuff like that. Like we always have like stuff sort of standing by to make sure like nobody doesn't have a present on Christmas and stuff like that.
It's great. And then your house it really is like and like your house itself is actually a really nice slice of like 90s Americana. Like I mean, you look like you grew up in the neighborhood that like E.T. could have.
Yes,
been
100%.
In,
it's
like
when I watch like 80s movies, I'm always like, I don't see what's so idyllic about this. This is just my neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very, especially for a guy my age. I mean, I'm 32. You're
I'm 31. Yeah,
32, and it's a very like, oh yeah, this feels good. Like
and we've been there forever. We moved there in 90, I want to say. And so we've just been there forever.
Yeah.
And so like if you look at photos of it from when we moved in and out, like it's a different house. Like we've just slowly turned it into every 5-6 years, we save up and some new project goes. So like, in like 99, we did the pool, and then like, when I was in college, my folks saved money and finally like redid the kitchen, like the studio was actually the byproduct of pushing off the kitchen. Because like at one point, because I was in bands, my dad was in bands, my brother was in bands. So before we had the studio, there were bands rehearsing in the living room of our house with full amps at least 3 nights a week, sometimes 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And my folks have been saving to get this kitchen redone because our kitchen used to be a real nightmare. And at some point my mom was like, look, I really want a new kitchen, but also, why don't we soundproof the garage and set this up? She's like, because then I can think again. Because like, God bless her soul. Like, she's just sitting with earplugs in, living her life, reading a magazine in her bedroom while a bunch of like shitty teenage boys just sweatily play bad music in the living room for 2 hours on a Tuesday night.
Oh, I love that. And so, I mean, obviously,
The neighborhood was also relatively happy about it.
that's funny, dude. And I mean, like, obviously, you had a pretty, I mean, a great relationship with your folks, and you still do now. Were there ever any like serious parenting moments you put them through?
Most definitely. Like, it's there's always ups and downs. You
Yeah.
know, I think like when I was like in high school, I was really, really starting to understand how severe the anxiety disorder I have is, and like found that like a lot of times my dad and I were butting heads around that time and stuff like that. And I think that like they've definitely like mellowed a ton. They were definitely both used to be a lot more high strung at different times. And I think that like everybody is a lot mellower than they used to be.
That's cool.
And I think that like, they were definitely very like protective and like involved and stuff like that, when I was younger and stuff like that, especially because my dad's like, hey, I know all about the drugs and mistakes you can make. And so my terror is watching you go down any of that stuff. So like they definitely like watch me like a hawk. So, like you have like the parents who like encourage you and help do your band flyers, but also like, there is like a layer of like, keeping your nose in stuff and doing those things. So when you're trying to be bad, all of a sudden you've got like people who are like real good at like calling you on your bullshit and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, so like I had, curfews a lot longer than other people did. I couldn't like close my door, for long periods of time and things like that, because it's just like keeping an eye, keeping me out of trouble. But I mean, at the same time, like they had a kid who like went to college and went to grad school and was doing all right. So I mean, they might have been right.
Yeah, right.
I find that when I went against what they did, oftentimes it didn't work great. So man, they can never hear this, or they'll just play that every time I complain about something.
That's funny.
I have like two very distinct memories. The first one was when I was in college. I had a friend and she had a 8-year-old daughter, and they were going to Disneyland, and they were like, "Hey, I have a bad back. If I buy you a pass, will you go with us when we take my daughter on the rides and stuff like that?" And I was like, hell yeah. Like, I'm 22 and broke. I'm going to Disneyland. This is great. No, I was thinking, I think I was like 19 or something like that. And like, I took him and, and so I'm, playing happy figure for this thing. And, by the end of it, I'm like, and, you are a father, these things.
Yeah.
By the end of it, I've got the passed out kid hanging off of my back as we're walking out after the fireworks. And like, I'm tired, but I'm also carrying a passed out human and shit like that. And I, dropped them off at the end of that weekend because it was like a 2-day run because we did both parks. And I was exhausted both physically and mentally in a way I'd never been tired before. Because you're no longer just there having fun for yourself. You are in charge of it, making sure this little human doesn't die all the time.
Right, constantly.
And I went home and I hugged both my parents and said, I am so sorry for everything I have done. And then a few years, and then maybe, almost 10 years later, that movie Boyhood came out. And Linklater's my boy. He's my favorite director.
Yeah.
And like, that movie hit me hard. Yeah. I know a lot of people are like, it's boring. I'm like, you're done. Sure, fine. Okay, I cried a bunch.
How does it feel to be dead inside?
Yeah. And I, hit up, after that movie, like I was sobbing by the end of that movie. And the next day, like again, walked in and hugged my parents, like, guys, I am so sorry again. Let me update from my last apology that I am still sorry.
Oh, that's funny.
So periodically they get to just like smugly laugh when I have contextually put in front of me. I'm like, you guys were right.
Yeah. And I mean, you've already told like a lot of great stories, but this is actually the part of the show where I ask for like a dad anecdote. And so were there any like dad stories left unturned that you really wanted to
I will laugh. I think if I do it tonight, man, I am laughing how much my voice is cracking on this. This is the episode where I'm going through second puberty.
I know.
I have a bit about my dad tonight that I'll make sure to do.
Oh, cool.
That's part of it. That's because my dad loves to talk to other musicians because they're all in his head part of the brotherhood of musicians. And so like there's so many like funny, goofy like music moments where like I remember like we were at a hotel and there were these guys with these big plastic golf cases. My dad was convinced they were horn cases and he was like giving them like sup, and then like it was like a couple of horn players in the other. My mom was like, those were golf cases. And he's like, no, those were horn cases. Or like, just a lot of shit like that, like, that I love, but or at the same time, like, he's been such a good sport about like cultural back and forths with us. Like, he took me to my first concert and took me to a social distortion show. So my dad took me into my first mosh pit.
Oh, wow.
We were both looking at it, and he can tell that I'm kind of into this. And so like I literally look at my dad goes in, and so I'm like, well, I guess I'm going in. And so like, shit like that where you just like, not a lot of dads, it turns out, do that. I thought, again, I never have a good reference point because I have my dad. So I just assume everybody's dad is my dad. And then it turns out most dads not as cool dad is my dad.
Yeah. That's
or
awesome,
like, but at the same time, he took me like my first Grateful Dead show.
Yeah.
Because that's one of his favorite bands.
Sure.
So getting to share that, and like he got to watch me, like this kid who thinks he's pretty cool, turn into like such a little narc when I saw like everybody, like how, like, I don't think, I think it's different now because like weed is legal and it's everywhere. But like, I remember at that point, I'd seen people smoke pot before. I may have done it. I don't remember in context of the story if it had happened by then or not. But I know like I was at this show and literally just everyone everywhere is just openly smoking weed. And I'm just like, can you believe this? I'm worried the authorities will be on there. Somebody's fetch me a constable. They're smoking drugs in this venue. And my dad's not doing drugs, but he's laughing at me for just having my mind blown that like people are doing drugs at a concert. I
love that.
And actually here's one more I'll share because I have a photo of it somewhere and I recently refound it and it's such a treasured thing. Music is such a thing my dad and my brother and I share. It's we still go to a ton of concerts together, and we all kind of turn each other on to new stuff. I hit my dad to Clutch. He's got me listening to a lot of the Meters because he's in a big like soul period and funk stuff.
Yeah.
And we kind of go back and forth, finding things. And back in 2006, I was about to finish my first year of college, and I'd had a really rough year. And my brother had kind of a rough year with his stuff. And so my dad ended up buying the three of us tickets to go to Bonnaroo, which is a big music festival in Tennessee.
Yeah.
And I had never heard of it. I didn't know what it was. And so I thought it was going to be some like hippie bullshit blues thing that would be like fun, but like I don't care. And then I saw like the lineup had like Sonic Youth and Bright Eyes and all these like things I love.
Oh shit.
And I was like, oh, this is dad bought us tickets to a cool thing. Because my dad was like, yeah, they've got I don't remember who even sold it to us on, but like he sold it on like the things he went for. And like, you missed all these things over here. And so we went, and one of the things on the bill, and he'd basically, we'd go see certain things all together, and then other things we'd watch kind of separately, and so it wasn't even like we all gotta stick together. So sometimes he'd be like, oh, I'm gonna go watch Mike Gordon and Ramble Dove, and we're gonna go watch Ben Folds or some shit. But then we're all gonna meet up later and watch Band of Horses. But the funniest one was he had an open slot, and so he's like, "Oh, I'll just hang with you guys. Who are you guys gonna see?" And I was like, all right, but just strap in because we're going to motherfucking Cypress Hill.
Oh, shit.
And so my dad walks over with us, and my dad has like a bucket hat. He looks like Hunter Thompson, if Hunter Thompson was also He-Man. And it's the three of us walk over, and my dad will roll with fucking anything. And like Cypress Hill, have you ever seen them live?
No.
I've seen them like 4 times. They're one of my favorite live bands.
That's hilarious.
And and they're fucking great. Every Cypress Hill song is good and dumb and great.
Yeah.
And like we're rocking at one point, they're like, everybody fucking throw your fucking middle fingers in the air to the motherfucking cops. And I turn around, my dad's got his fucking middle finger in the air, and I get a picture of it. So I have a picture of my dad in a bucket hat holding up his middle finger, and it's one of my favorite things in the world.
I mean, if anybody would get it, it's your dad.
Oh my God, it was just such a fun thing.
That's
just
too funny, dude.
He hates that photo exists. He's like, guys, I have to talk to the mayor of our town to get permits for shit for my job. Like, you guys can't just be like throwing that photo around and shit.
That's amazing.
But so like just fun shit like that, and he kind of goes all over the place and this and that. But like, man, he is just like, he's just a good dude. And that's really what I picked up from him as a person is just be a good dude. Give people an even shake. Don't be a dick. Don't be be humble. You never know from one moment to the next. He's a guy who's learned firsthand that like things can go good and things can go bad real fast. So just not being an asshole. One of his quotes is like, not being a dick never cost me anything. But being a dick has cost me a lot. And that's always been one of those things that I kind of like
motto.
Look at in life and just, and it's always nice. I know a lot of people who have, issues with their folks. And it's one of those things I'm always real grateful for is I got real lucky on that run.
Yeah. Oh, that's great, man. Well, dude, thanks so much for telling me about your dad.
Bro, you kidding me, man? This is awesome.
This is great.
I've been, I've looked at Sad Dad since it started and was like, I want to be on Sad Dad.
Kyle, we're going to have a ton of fun tonight.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah, dude. Thanks so much.
Yeah, at Kyle Clark is rad. And my podcast, This Is Rad. My album's I'm a Person.
Yeah. That was great. I feel like you've plugged yourself many times before.
I've got it down to a science.
Awesome, man.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Kyle Clark, everybody. What'd you think? He's great, right? Follow Kyle on all the things, on the Twitters and Instagrams and all of that. Listen to his podcast. His podcast is great. You want to hear something sad? I guess it's not really sad. It was like I spent the better part of 72 hours straight with Kyle. And as soon as I left his house, I was on the drive home. I was listening to his podcast. It was like we never left, or I never left. So, anyway, guys, if you enjoyed the show, give it a rating and review on iTunes. If you leave me a review, I will read it on air for you guys, give you a little shout out. If you have any dadictotes of your own, you can send those to saddadpodcast@gmail.com. Also, too, if you want to support the show financially, get a few bucks a month, you can subscribe to the Sad Dad Patreon. Helps me pay for equipment and hosting fees for the podcast. It's totally free. But it does cost some money on my end, and if you guys wanted to help me out with that, well, I'd love you forever. So I'll love you anyway. What am I talking about? You're great. Everybody that's ever reached out to me about this podcast, it's just been the coolest person. I'm like, I love you guys. So next week I've got, if you listened to last week's episode, you heard I had a conversation with Liam Womack about a gentleman named Jeremiah. Yeah, Jeremiah Lloyd. And I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to have Jeremiah on next week because I've been wanting to have him on for a while. And Jeremiah is one of those guys that, again, if you heard Liam and I talk about him, he's just kind of unapologetically who he is. And he can come off a little abrasive, but God damn it, once you get to know him, he's one of the sweetest, most caring people you'll ever meet. And so real excited he's coming in tomorrow to record with me, and I'll have that ready for you guys next week. But for now, that is it. I told you guys I'd give you an update on Disneyland. Went to Disneyland with my daughter. It was a lot of fun. I surprised her. She had no idea I was going to be there. Her and her mom and her aunt got off the Indiana Jones ride, and I was hiding like in a pile of strollers. And I like burst out and surprised her, and she had a great time. We rode all the rides together. She showed me around. She's been there at this point, I think, more than I have in my life. And she told me all the cool things to do, and it was a really, really fun time. So I wanted to give you guys that update because I know I told you I would. So that's it, guys. I will see you next week with my guest Jeremiah Lloyd. Adios.